Hi, I'm Ruiz, and this is Goliath. Welcome to my classroom. In this video, I will be discussing the methodology of virtue ethics. Check it out, it's ethics, brah. I have already discussed two ethical methodologies in previous videos. Deontologists believe that a moral action is correct if the action itself corresponds with universal moral principles. Consequentialists believe that a moral decision is correct if the outcome of the action produces happiness for most people. In contrast, virtue ethics is not concerned particularly with actions or outcomes. Virtue ethicists care about the character of the person making the decision. If I were a virtue ethicist, I would not ask, is this a good action? Is this a good outcome? But rather I would ask, am I a good person? The big question is, how do you evaluate the character of a person? One possible response is, you evaluate the person's habits over time. What do they tend to do? Let's explore that more. The most foundational philosophical figure for virtue ethics is Aristotle. Aristotle defines virtue as a good habit and vice as a bad habit. And you grow in virtue through practice. And Aristotle's virtue theory rests on three important principles. Those are potentiality, the doctrine of the mean, and eudaimonia. By potentiality, Aristotle is saying that we have an innate ability to do a certain thing, and we can grow in our ability to do it well if we practice. This relates to the popular phrase of practice makes perfect. Let's illustrate with an example. I play volleyball, but do I play well? That depends on whether I have reached a certain threshold above which I can be considered a good volleyball player. And how do I reach the threshold? I practice. I'm winded. Another example is honesty. Am I an honest person? That depends. Have you told the truth enough times to consider yourself honest? Are you in the habit of telling the truth? Have you told the truth enough times to consider yourself good at truth telling? It's a matter of practice. The second principle is the doctrine of the mean. This doctrine states that every virtue falls between two vices. First, a vice of deficiency, in which you do not practice the virtue enough. And second is a vice of excess, in which you practice the virtue a little too much. Take volleyball, for example. If I practice it too little, I don't become good. But if I practice too much to the point where I overexert or hurt myself, I will also not progress in becoming a good volleyball player. And to bring it back to honesty, if I'm honest too little, I'm a liar. But if I'm honest too much, I disclose things people shouldn't know, and I might divulge secrets. Honesty falls in between those two vices. Being honest is about saying true things in the right moment. Only then can I grow in this potential. So we practice the virtues and we practice them the correct amount of times. Important note, the virtue is not always smack in the middle between the two vices. Sometimes it's closer to the vice of excess, as with honesty I would argue, and sometimes closer to the vice of deficiency. The third principle is eudaimonia, which means happiness.
Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth.
You knew that was coming. For Aristotle, happiness means fulfillment. We reach eudaimonia when we fulfill the potentials of our moral virtues. Now, when it comes to volleyball, I know what to practice. Volleying, thumping, spiking. But with regards to morals, which habits should we practice? Greek philosophers, and Christian ones, recognize four cardinal virtues. They are fortitude, prudence, justice, and temperance. That could be a rap. Fortitude, prudence, justice, and temperance. 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 Thank you. Now, these virtues are called cardinal because they serve as a hinge for all other virtues. They are the pivot point for all other good habits such as honesty, kindness, generosity, genuineness, etc. You can't practice other virtues without these four. Let's explore their meaning. Fortitude means inner strength or courage. Prudence means practical wisdom about what decision I should make when there are multiple viable options. Justice is about giving other people their due. And temperance is about moderating desire. Psych! Potentiality applies to the cardinal virtues. You need to practice these in order to become good at them. And the doctrine of the mean also applies. You gotta practice them the correct amount of times. Let's explore them individually. Too little fortitude and you're a coward. But too much fortitude and you're stubborn and obstinate. Too little prudence and you're rash or impulsive. Too much prudence and you are over deliberating and indecisive. Too little justice and you're unjust, greedy, or selfish. But too much justice and you are self-depleted. You've given others too much. And temperance is about moderating desire. Too little desires and you're insensible. It basically means that you lack the appropriate desires. Eating, connection, relaxation, etc. But too much desire and you become gluttonous. So we need to practice the cardinal virtues the right amount of times in order to fulfill that potential for the 4 virtues. And finally, the cardinal virtues are a package deal. You have to practice all 4 of them in order to acquire any one of them. Think about it. Without fortitude, can you be prudent, just, and temperate? Without prudence, can you be fortified, just, and temperate? Without a sense of justice, can you be fortified, prudent, and temperate? And without temperance, can you be fortified, prudent, and just? They go together like 4 peas in a pod. While Western philosophy credits ancient Greek philosophers for the creation of virtue ethics, many religions incorporate this classical philosophy into their worldview and into their moral codes. Let's look at a religious response. The Catholic tradition incorporates virtue ethics into its moral code. 13th century philosopher Thomas Aquinas largely based his moral philosophy on the work of Aristotle. By the way, he didn't plagiarize, he cited Aristotle. Aquinas adopted Aristotle's views on potentiality, the doctrine of the mean, and the classical list of the 4 cardinal virtues. However, Aquinas contributes a list of 3 theological virtues which are infused with the 4 cardinal ones. And the 3 theological virtues are faith, hope, and love. Faith refers to the belief in God. Hope refers to the trust in God's master plan. And love is the kind of self-giving sacrifice for God and for others that would get us into heaven. Now, according to Aquinas, the theological virtues are different from the cardinal virtues in 2 different ways. First, they are not a matter of potentiality. We don't need to practice them over and over in order to acquire them. They are already a gift from God. It's our choice to accept it into our lives. Aquinas calls these the infused virtues because God infuses our lives with them. Second, the theological virtues do not follow the doctrine of the mean because a person can practice them over and over again without end. According to Aquinas, you can never have too much faith, hope, and love. Most importantly, when we accept God's gift of the theological virtues and infuse them with our cardinal virtues, we perfect our cardinal virtues. And for Aquinas, perfection means doing something to the best of your ability. In other words, being faithful, hopeful, and loving enables us to be fully temperate, fortified, just, and prudent. And on a more reflective note, if you practice these virtues, you embody good character. And if you embody good character, you reflect Jesus. And that's the best kind of person we can be. It is important to note that modern virtue theory often departs from a eudaimonic conception of virtue. Some of these theories do not prescribe a specific set of virtues as cardinal or theological. However, they retain the dynamics of potentiality and the doctrine of the mean. As with all other methodologies, virtue ethics can be applied at 2 different levels. You knew that was coming. First, the personal morals level involves the practice of virtue in our day-to-day lives. Second, the social justice level involves a societal and systematic application of virtue theory. And that can be done in 2 ways. First, societies must decide what virtues and values they hold most dear, and then they must create laws that preserve, reflect, and promote them. This is called communitarianism. Second, society must recognize and appreciate the individual potential of each person and must provide them the means to flourish in that potential and in their own conception of what is good. And that is called capabilities theory. I'll discuss communitarianism and capabilities theory in another video. Now, like every other moral method, virtue ethics has some critiques. First, what happens if virtues conflict? What happens if a student comes to me and says, "So, Mr. Ruiz, how you doing? Listen, man, I didn't finish the assignment for today because I had practice yesterday and then I had to do a bunch of chores and I just couldn't get to the homework. I'm sorry, bruh." How do I respond to that? Do I exercise fortitude and hold steadfast to my no late work policy? Or do I employ justice to figure out what is due to this student? Should I be prudent in figuring out how this affects my class? Or should I be loving and self-sacrificial towards a student who is perhaps overwhelmed? All of these might be good options, and they are virtuous responses. So virtue ethics doesn't always provide a clear path. Second, how do we apply the virtue when there are multiple valid applications? For example, if I employ justice towards that student, am I supposed to be just towards the student and figure out what the student needs? Or should I be just towards the rest of my students who turned in the assignment on time? Is it just for me to give one kid an exemption and not the rest? Does the student's particular circumstance make this situation different? I don't know. I guess I'll have to decide that. So even if you hone in on one virtue, it's not always clear how it applies. Third, at a societal level, what happens if the ideologies that society decides to adopt are not really virtues? What if a society decides to adopt racial superiority or racial supremacy as a main ideology? That's what Nazi Germany did. Nazi Germans thought they were being virtuous by cleansing their race. Fourth, and related to third, since most modern conceptions of virtue ethics do not have a notion of universal eudaimonic virtue, do they open themselves up to moral relativism? If we do not have a set prescription of virtues, and we do not have a common process for identifying what are virtues and what are not, then it's really up to us to decide what principles we will apply at any time. And that affects us at a personal level when different people have conflicting conceptions of right and wrong, and at a societal level when different countries have conflicting conceptions of right and wrong. In sum, virtue ethics' focus on the character of the agent making the decisions offers important contributions to the field of ethics. If you like virtue ethics, I suggest you stand in front of a mirror, examine your habits and your choices, and ask yourself these 3 questions. What kind of person am I? What kind of person do I think I should be? And what kind of choices can I make on a day-to-day basis to become the person I think I should be? Thanks for watching my video. In my next video, I'll discuss the relationship and difference between the concept of justice and the concept of charity. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like and subscribe.